Wow.
What's going on, everybody? Today is Thursday, October 26th. You're listening, watching the Daily AI Show live. And today we got a bunch of us, not all of us. We got Robert, Beth, Andy, Aaron, and I'm Brian. And today we are talking about, and Jimmy, who just joined us. Welcome,
Jimmy.
Today we're talking about installing LLMs on your local machine. So this could be something you're doing on the personal level. It could be something you're doing for business. Obviously, we want to talk about both. And yeah, I think we just kind of want to dive in here. So I don't know, Robert, I'm going to kick it off to you first because I know you've done some work in this area, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I want to start with what it is and why you'd want to do it and whether you should do it and what are the benefits. And so, and all those questions, anybody can jump in on that. But I have a few examples I will show that I literally just tried out about 15 minutes ago because there's versions I hadn't heard of before. And so we can show those. But the first thing is understanding, what's the purpose of doing this? The purpose of doing it is so that one, you don't have to have the internet, number one. Number two, whatever you're talking to it about, it stays on your computer locally. You don't have to worry about if you're trying to, train it on your IP or something, or not train it, but try to ask questions about something that you feel like is a little sensitive in your company, and you don't want to send it out to the servers in OpenAI, which they've said they'll train on your prompts and the results of your prompts. So if you don't want that happening, you can do it locally. Now, the beauty of doing it locally is you can pick the model that you use as well. So there's a slew of open source models out there that they're getting better and better, quite frankly. So what are your favorite? I already have a question. What are your favorite models? Well, Mistral 7B is right now on the top of my list. It's out of, I want to say it's out of France. It kind of came in under the radar. It's been pretty impressive of late. LLaMA 2 is the first one to come out from Meta of any note. Vicuna is pretty good as well. Oh, bring Carl in here. And there you go. You did. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. All right. Hey, and so those are the three that I've been playing around with. But I mean, quite frankly, I don't really have a lot of use for it yet. The clients that we're working for haven't really pushed that as an issue. I don't want my stuff out there on the web and that kind of stuff. So we haven't had that as a problem. But look, since we're going into it, while I'm going to screen share, why don't everybody jump in with some of their opinions or thoughts on this matter?
I'll just add that in addition to the models you mentioned, Falcon is the leaderboard winner on Hugging Face, which is a place where you can actually use their system to download and operate a local LLM.
Right. All right. So this is LM Studio. It ridiculously easy. I didn't follow any instructions or any videos of how to install it. I just actually, quite frankly, I Googled how to install an I've been trained through the years to use the word
Google. Yeah.
I Perplexity AI'd. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but I used Perplexity AI because I didn't want to use Bard because this hasn't been reliable. Didn't want to use Bing because I don't like the interface. And so Perplexity has a way of really kind of using the language models, and it's a great search engine. So highly recommend Perplexity AI. Anyway, so I went there and said, how do you install language models on your local computer? And it gave me 4 options. The first one was LM Studio, and the second one was LLaMA, which I'll show here in a second. So So LM Studio allows you to basically pick the model that you want. So you go in here and you say, I wanted Mistral, or would you say it was not Vicuna? You said Falcon. Yeah. So I want Falcon. So I go and I search for Falcon, and it shows you different iterations of it. So they're not just one version. People take the version, they modify it. Here's one that's uncensored for those who want that kind of thing. There's different, 180 billion parameters versus the 7 billion parameters. So there's different sizes, as you can see, 5 gigs. So basically what you do is you download it onto your computer, okay, 7 gigs, whatever. And you go over here and then you select the, I'm looking at, it's funny. I'm looking at the screen. I'm not looking at my screen anyway. Okay. So you go over here to, and you select the model that you want. I've already installed Mistral, so I've been using this one. This one is the Bloke Mistral Instruct 17 billion bunch of stuff. So if you want more information on this particular model, you just go into Hugging Face and look at the description and whatnot. I just asked it a basic question here, just like, you know, a recipe for spring rolls. So that wasn't too hard, right? But, you know, well, give me something. What are the first 10 presidents? I don't know. This is easy stuff, right? It's not something that you can, obviously it's not quite as fast because it's going locally on your computer and whatnot, but you know, not too bad. We'd have to kind of do more complex testing to see if how it measures up and where it starts to break, obviously, but simple. I mean, you download the app, you download the language model you want to use, the open source model, and then you start using it. Bada boom, bada bing.
Was there anything about Mistral in particular that drew your eye as opposed to any of the other 7 billion parameter versions of?
Yeah, so smarter people than me have already tested it and they say it's doing well. So I kind of read, you know, the highlights of other people and they said Mistral is really good, and so I thought, okay, well, I've put that in my back of my head and I want to try them out. So
all right, I want to add that for a typical business user, there are some system requirements you have to be aware of here. A 7 billion parameter model that's a size of number of parameters in the deep neural network that will fit onto a 16 gigabyte PC and or Mac, and that's about the limit of what you would normally acquire when you're buying a local machine. But now Robert's in a beautiful position. I just asked him before the show, how many gigabytes does his MacBook Pro with an M1 chip have? And he said 64 gigabytes. Well, that's a very large memory. That's you know, not typical for one of us, right? So great. I wish I had one like that. That allows him to choose from among the larger parameter models. Let me also just throw in quickly how it is that a 7 billion parameter model can start to do the kinds of things and achieve a substantial percentage of the capabilities of one of the very large models that you have access to through the web. So for example, if you're using GPT-4, that is measured in trillions of parameters. And when you get down to 7 billion, that's a tiny, tiny fraction of that. And yet it can do a lot of what the major large language models can do. So how do they get it down to the smaller size? Well, they would start with the larger model's output. So one way they do it is by what's called pruning. They identify which of these neurons in the neural network aren't really that important to the typical operations, and they just cut them out. That reduces the size of the model. A second methodology for getting it down is called quantization. And that is like you're using weights for each of those neurons to represent in collective fashion the way that large language model thinks. Well, normally you'd use 32-bit, you know, floating point numbers for that. Well, you can reduce that all the way down to 8, and that reduces the size of the model, and that gets you down to the smaller thing. But it's still a fair representation of what the more accurate or more precise model was able to generate. And then the last one I want to mention, and there's other methods that are being used to compress these models into smaller sizes to make them available to you locally. It's called knowledge distillation. And that's where a smaller model is trained just to mimic a larger model. So it's not really, it's being trained on the output of the larger model and learning how to represent that even with its smaller parameter set. So really incredible technology that makes it possible for us to have an LLM like you saw Robert show on his desktop, even on a smaller machine. But in reality, you're going to want to have a really fast CPU, a lot of VRAM, and maybe if you have a PC, even buy an NVIDIA you know, GPU that's really rated to do LLMs, and they're not expensive, not like the ones that are running the trillion parameter models. You can get one for under $500, let's say, to add to.
But I will say that the two options I did were Mac friendly, not necessarily Windows friendly. So I'll mention that to you. Number two, to Andy's point, you know, getting the smaller models to behave as good as the bigger ones is a constant research product. I'm reading and listening to papers constantly about techniques and tricks that they're doing to optimize so you don't have to have as big a model. So in my head, they're going to get smaller and smaller and better and better.
Yeah.
Partly because the data they're training on is much better. And lastly, you said something else. I forgot what I was going to say. Crap.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that
we're talking about adding a GPU.
Oh yeah, that was it. Sorry, good. So the GPU part, there's a space between these, right? There's a space between using GPT-4 ChatGPT and putting on your own computer. It's renting space on a cloud-based GPU, which is Hugging Face. You can actually rent time out of one of those high-performing H100s if you can find them available, and so you can actually run models on their servers, not have to use your own, and they're much more powerful and faster, and you can run the bigger models. So there is a intermediary if you don't have the money to buy your own computer yet. That could be the middle ground.
Right.
Speaking of the whole subject of GPUs, just briefly, I read recently that apparently NVIDIA is working on I think it's going to be a variation of the RTX 4800, which is currently their second from top of the line consumer card. Apparently it's going to be tuned for LLM use. So it'll be interesting to see when that sort of stuff comes out, where it's better designed for this sort of stuff. You may not need to be going out and buying really expensive things if you're perhaps doing it on a budget.
Yeah. Oh, Jimmy, you had something to say? Or
running the space in between, though, eliminates the benefit of not needing the internet, because what you're doing by running the space is going to the internet.
Yeah, but of course, the benefit of going after one of those cloud-based models or open source models, you're not having to adhere to the protections and the different things they've done to the models that you might not like. Let's say you wanted to curse at you. Let's say you want to do other things that maybe you want to talk about politics. Maybe you want to generate images that are different. So I think that's what people are using them for. Maybe you want to start a Nigerian prince scam. You can't do that. I mean, that's probably what they're using it for. Jimmy, your thoughts?
Right. Well, I just wanted to, and this kind of leads into why you would want to use, right, a local installation of an LLM. Right. So we've covered a bunch of different aspects of LLMs, local LLMs, and things like that. Even the hybrid models. What I call a hybrid, where you're renting cloud space to run your local model, and that's essentially, it comes down to two main things, right? Your privacy concerns, IP concerns, things like that, and then scalability. Right. So a con of running a local model is it doesn't scale very well. Right. You have to invest in more hardware. You have to invest in maintenance, updates, all of those kinds of things. But you get privacy. You get data protection. You know where all the data is residing and where it's going in and out and things like that. Cloud-based solutions like GPT-4 and OpenAI and things like that is you're trading that data with them. Yeah. Right. Whatever kind of agreement you might have, master service agreement and all those kinds of things, it's the data still going somewhere else and it's being processed somewhere else. And that's sort of where, and then just touching upon that hybrid is, yes, you're running your own instance, you're running your own model so that you have more freedom and control over it, but you're still putting that data on someone else's data.
Explain what you mean by scaling.
Okay, so essentially, the big benefit of cloud-based solutions overall is that they have huge data centers and huge, throughput that they can scale up your process. Meaning, if you have more users, more requests, your model gets larger, you have a larger data set. All of these kinds of things can automatically be routed and more resources given to your project. That's the big advantage of these cloud-based access or data centers and things like that. Whereas if you're doing it locally, you're the one who has to make sure that if you need to scale up, let's say your response is a little too slow internally, okay, that means I need more hardware to be able to run it more effectively, or retune the model so that it, you know, responds faster.
I guess you wouldn't need it to scale up very much if it's on your particular computer and every one of your employees has the same type of little assistant that's downloaded and installed on their computer, which is kind of how I'm visualizing what, if we're going to go back to the bet, Carl, that Apple is going to be doing. That's their play. I believe their play is they already have millions of devices everywhere. If they can just make it so their model fits on a device, oh my word!
We've seen models come out that will fit on a mobile device now. 3 billion parameters that are functioning like 7 billion parameter models, and 3 billion. The general equation is for every billion you need a gig of RAM, right? You need a gig of memory. So the average phone now has 6 or 8. So that's more than enough resources to run that for you. And Andy, to what you're speaking about specifically about some of the resource allocation, I would just suggest that people remember that they have to run everything else on their computer as well. So their OS, any other software that they're running in the background. So that does chip away at it, and it's going to.
Yeah, I run StreamYard for this thing, and it crashes Chrome. So,
well, God help you if you want to.
Gigabytes on this, so it's not really quite enough, but it would be just barely enough if you shut everything else down and then just ran your LLM along.
We're going to put in the show notes. We're going to put a GoFundMe page for Andy and for Jimmy. Any computers.
So let's talk about it a little bit, because Robert, you mentioned the Mac, and I run on PCs. And so what I have found with PCs, and I found this over and over. So this is the reason, not for LLMs, but when I was trying to run Adobe products, honestly, Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects, things like this, which are notorious for crashing, as big as Adobe is, notoriously for shutting down computers and not finishing the project. So what I found for me was, even though I'm not a gamer at all, if I bought in at the baseline of a gaming PC, for me, that's the equivalent of having like sort of that Mac power. And I've done that now on 2 iterations, so maybe over the last 5 years, and it's worked wonderfully. So I just happened to, while you guys were talking and Andy, you were talking and stuff, I just looked really quick on Amazon, and it's about what I expected, which is that if this was something that was, you know, you wanted to have this kind of computing power, you can really get into like a baseline, what would be considered to be a gaming PC. It's going to have the NVIDIA chip in there. It's going to have the VRAM. It's going to have regular RAM on there. It's going to have all the space you need and stuff like that. 32 gigabytes on the RAM, things like that, right at about $1,000. Now, should that be the reason you go out and spend $1,000 just to have a local LLM? I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying that I have found personally that is a great starting point. If you're trying to dip your toe in the water. The other thing I want
to define something for people, because this was confusing to me early on, and maybe there's some listeners that are confusing. There's a difference between training an LLM and using an LLM. So when they're talking about training it in the news, that's 10,000 of these running for like a month to train it. What we're talking about is the iteration part. It's once it's trained, we're requesting something, and it's going through what Andy described as the nodes kind of bouncing around from the weights and understanding and spitting out a response. So it's we're not, when you're hearing it in the news, those are 2 different things, 2 different types of compute power. So.
Just a quick one. We've got someone on LinkedIn who's been dropping a few comments there. I liked his latest one. He said you can do it quite a bit cheaper than now, but it's still a spendy hobby. He's got a ThinkStation with 512 gigabytes of RAM and 2 RTX 3090s. Now, 3090 is not the latest card, but
just a small computer.
Yeah,
that's a big machine. There are other reasons why you might want to have such a powerful PC. And for example, VR is a reason to have that kind of capability. And all kinds of simulations, like flight simulation that Aaron and I are very interested in, those take a huge amount of graphic processing power. And these kinds of machines are going to be
3090s. That's overkill.
I have envy of that 512 gigabytes of RAM. That's amazing.
Yeah.
This is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Running on a Raspberry Pi. Now that's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah.
I don't know a ton, but I know enough to know Raspberry Pi is a tiny computer. And if you're running an LLM on that, it just shows maybe the efficiency that they're running at. And this kind of just really quick for me, I was just curious to the group, like, so everything I hear you guys saying is not my area of expertise at all. I'm learning from y'all. Is everything I'm hearing you say is like, okay, well, there's some benefits to running it locally on my machine. But what it sounds to me is like, in comparison to just running ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, another LLM, right, or LLaMA or whatever. But what I'm wondering is really what we're talking about here is that there would be those reasons to do it, but essentially in the near future, every Mac, every PC, every Windows machine, right, is going to be shipped with a local LLM installed, and maybe to your point, Jimmy, also phones, right? And why would you want that? Why would that be a benefit for you? Well, it actually could help my machine run more efficiently, I'm assuming, using some of the power of that LLM. And so just simple things like document retrieval and semantic search and doing vectoring across my local files. Now, maybe everybody is doing everything cloud or whatever, but it just makes me think like, oh, isn't that a potential good possibility? And then if you have intranets at companies, which a lot of companies still use, where there's a Hive connected, but they're not necessarily connected outside the walls. My wife works for government. This is pretty common, of what they can or can't do. Then I could see some really good use cases, perhaps, for having local LLMs that are part of an intranet that help solve some of these problems. So just curious, like, do you guys see this as like, I don't know, it's like we're saying, oh, here's the reason you would do a local LLM versus using ChatGPT. And I'm thinking, well, no, aren't they really probably two different use cases in a lot of ways, or could be?
There definitely are different use cases. I think that having it on your computer and not attached, we'll pause that, attached to a local intranet, because that's a whole different use case. Because what you're asking first and foremost is, I want the power of a language model to ask questions. But then you start saying, I want a power of a language model that's interfacing with my documents. That's a whole nother thing. That's not going to be the first iteration. That's going to be what Copilot is doing. That's going to be what a lot of these services are going to be doing, obviously.
Right. And Carl, what's the difference of this between having a local LLM and having a chatbot trained on your documents?
Well, I think I wanted to answer that question that somebody put in. Have you fine-tuned a model to do, whatever it is? And that, for that question, yes, I've done it. And I actually was doing it with Mistral, because, again, what is it? I really want to say the Daily AI Show, but it's not. It's the Australian guys' show.
Yeah.
They were talking about, yeah, and they were talking about it. So I was like, okay, that's amazing, because I think the real benefit is, can you fine tune any of these specifically on you, like specific to your use case? And that's why I was excited with Falcon 7B. It's like, is that the new open source standard, but it requires ridiculous computing power. And I think that's where everything that you've all said about having the ability to be on your phones, having all these new PCs and new Macs potentially being shipped with these things, fine tuning it still takes a little bit of time, but it's not going to be long where people can fine tune models relatively quickly, relatively easily. That in that ability, there could be a world where you could pick whatever model. It's no longer, OpenAI, whatever.
Once they're a commodity, I agree with you. Now, the question then is, though, if we could get back to fine tuning, how is it? Because I know that OpenAI offered this, and then I tried to get it up. They haven't responded to me, like the sales team, because we wanted to try to do that. Formally fine tuning, like on GPT-4. Have you been able to do that, Carl? Or are you only using OpenAI models?
3.5 Turbo. I don't think I haven't seen the release of that. So, and the things that they've done with it initially, when you initially had to fine tune GPT-3, it was you needed, I think it was like 100 examples. Now with 3.5 Turbo, you need what, 10? examples. That's all you need. And I've started seeing people do it. Oh, they've created synthetic data from a small set of data. So that opens up a lot more opportunities to make it easier to fine tune. And then, right now the process of fine tuning, you actually have a very specific thing you have to do, but it's not going to be long until, you just hit a couple buttons, add your resources in a way better UI, and that's it. Everyone can do it. So, but going back to hosting locally, I think that's where the real benefit is to be able to choose the model that you want, fine tune it to your specific use case. Maybe it would be something like Open Interpreter, right? For all those people who use Open Interpreter on their computer, and being able to ask it to do whatever you want. That's bridging it, starting to move it into like the action models that we really want, or the agents on your computer, or the agents that we want actually it to do something, not just respond to your questions.
An Open Interpreter is...
You're talking about agents right now, right, Carl?
Yeah. So Open Interpreter is something that you can install on your computer. Essentially, you could probably think about it as ChatGPT for your computer. It's like, build me an app. It'll build you like their example is Pomodoro timer, or turn it into dark mode, like those kind of things, or install this way. Like now you're actually interfacing and taking action on your machine,
on your command line.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, well, this is a perfect way to segue into takeaways. What would you say for our audience is main takeaway for having a LLM on locally on your machine?
Well,
I'll just say,
I don't be honest and say that at the moment I don't have a use case for downloading and installing something like this, but I can absolutely see a time, especially when it's easier to use, where, for example, as a marketer or somebody doing, if someone comes up with something that will improve my ability to produce better marketing or videos or whatever, then I can see a case for it. But at the moment, it just doesn't make sense for me to spend the time and the effort doing it when I can subscribe to GPT for $20 a month, and at the moment, Claude's free. So,
yeah, I mean, I'll just piggyback on that. I think probably I agree with most of that, Aaron, as far as like the size of the organization. If you're a single person company, or maybe less than a few people, but it also really just is hyper dependent on the use case of what the company is doing, and how big of a deal privacy is, and what they're doing, or whether they need to be operating in quote unquote secret or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why people have to be really, really careful about that based on their use cases. So I do think it's just hyper dependent on what you're trying to achieve. I would say for the vast majority of us, using the regular LLMs on, through cloud or whatever, are probably going to be just fine. In terms of fine tuning, the only thing I could really say to that is, because I don't have experience with it, is just that even OpenAI wrote a whole article about it and said, look, we don't think you should need to fine tune our LLM. That shouldn't be something you should be focusing on necessarily, or thinking you need to do. The first step is to really, really get good at your prompts and run them through all the paces to make sure that the prompts are doing as much as you can. And if only you find that the prompts are just not producing the right types of results for you, should you consider fine tuning. And I just think that's like, I don't know, it's easy to get wrapped up in the sexy and like, oh, I'm going to fine tune or whatever. And probably for the most of us, it's not necessary. But I just think there's a lot of use cases. So I don't know. My takeaway is, it's not me. I'm kind of like Aaron. Like it's not something I think I need, but I can certainly see there's probably lots of businesses out there going like, oh, that's exactly what we need, and it's a benefit that we're able to do it.
So I would agree that both my thoughts were both like Aaron and Brian's, were like, I don't have a use case for it, but I've forced myself to try it because I see the future that we will have these deployable, and I want to get ahead of the curve as far as how to do it. Because I want to be able to, because right now, I would say the reason I don't have a use case is because they're not good enough. The open source models aren't as good as GPT-4, and I'd rather go to the best, right? Why drive to the supermarket in a Yugo when you can drive in a Ferrari, But my point is, I think that with understanding how these operate, play with it, put it on your machine, and just see how it works, and then be aware of that type of technology is my takeaway. Somebody, Erica had a question. I'm not sure if she meant what I was talking about, or
no,
was
I think she meant code interpreter.
Open interpreter?
Open interpreter.
Open interpreter.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, so yeah, it's openinterpreter.com, which then links you to the GitHub, and then you can install it that way.
Ooh. And another comment just came in that said the more you use the open source models, the better they'll get. So that's a piece too. My key takeaway is something that was embedded in the conversation, but that I want to highlight. This ecosystem is changing so often that if you are going to do this, you want to have a scaling plan, right? This is not a like, hey, we install it and it's good for 3 years. You can use it for 3 years, but maybe in 6 months you're behind, right?
Mhm.
So when you're doing this, the barrier to get in, you may be able to like go over that barrier. Like, fine, I can spend the time. I have the CPU or whatever we just said. Listen to the show. But that's not the only thing. The tail comes quickly.
I think the takeaway here is, while a lot of people, like just regular people, probably won't even know what a Mistral, what a Falcon, what fine tuning is, it's really, really, really important to at least understand the concepts. Even if you have no business going into OpenTrooper, no business fine tuning, no business going to Hugging Face, like, you have to understand what is going on, and just keeping, like, even just going to a newsletter and just reading or listening to a podcast, to this show, or I can't, for the life of me, I can never remember their show.
Last week in AI.
Yeah, Last Week in AI, or no, it's I don't know. I have
only this show.
Yeah,
This week.
it's really important to understand, because even if you don't put it on your computer, these things, unlike any technology in the world, these things are moving so fast that things are adapting. Like, for example, if you go to Open Interpreter website, there is coming a desktop app. So you don't even need to go to GitHub. You don't need to install it that way. You can go directly you can have it directly on your desktop. That will be the case for fine tuning. That will be the case for using open models. That will be the case where, there may be a use case you have that you might want to use and install an LLM on your desktop locally. That it's important, but to do that, you have to know. So keep yourself informed, even if you don't plan to use it in the near future.
I want to say that the very fact that super powerful AIs will be available to local machines opens the opportunity for bad actors to do terrible things with those machines. And so the cat is out of the bag. There's no way to bring them back. We talked about being able to run an LLM for $1,000 on a $1,000 machine. But what if you have $25,000 to mount a system that's connected to the internet that is going to be fine-tuned to do something nefarious? That's a major issue, because most of the governance that major players in the AI world, including the team of companies that Biden just announced, have decided to get together to talk about governance of AI. That's just you can't control the individuals who are operating individual LLMs with sophisticated capabilities.
Yeah.
I'll say, I guess a application for businesses is, if your data that you work with is highly sensitive, beyond just PII, but like you need HIPAA compliance, GDPR, all of these, and these are paramount for your business, consider running a local LLM to take advantage of the power and leveraging an AI in your business, especially if you're going to try and build out a product using that data. It's difficult right now to completely answer where the data rests, where it is in transit, and how that's processed by other sources like OpenAI or Google or whoever. So so if data privacy is paramount for you, specifically for compliances like HIPAA and medical things, I would say really consider developing a local LLM.
Nice.
Yep. I like it.
All right.
Okay. So I'm going to wrap things up here real quick. I want to say quick shout out and thank you to both Camilla, Erica, and I'm sorry we don't know your name. It just comes up as LinkedIn user on ours, but you've done a ton of comments in here, and obviously you have some industry expertise, which we really appreciate. We're just so thankful for anybody that comes in and puts comments in. It helps the show be better, and just generally we really appreciate it. So we try to get to all of them. This is your last comment about, just talking about Hugging Face being really, really helpful as a resource, which we all agree on for sure. GitHub documents like that. Tomorrow we have AI and bias, not in bias, but AI bias. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow. And Aaron in the AI Exchange just said, it's me. So I think the LinkedIn user is Aaron, who's in our Slack channel for the AI Exchange. So I love that. It's me. Awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much for that. I was the LinkedIn. Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Aaron. Aaron Coolby. I hope I'm saying
not
that.
me, Aaron, obviously.
Oh,
that's awesome, Aaron. I love it. Quick to the draw.
I have to say, I'm jealous of your computer, Aaron.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we'll be talking about bias with AI. To wrap up the week, it'll be Aloha Friday, and we'll be back then. So until tomorrow, guys, till we wrap up the week, everybody have a wonderful Thursday. Thank you for all your comments and adding to the conversation. And we'll be back tomorrow. That's it.
Aloha.
Ugh.